She ruined my artwork, deeming it valueless. The following day, museers began reaching out. I witnessed a year and a half of my passion torn into pieces, while Serena grinned as if she were doing me a kindness. Yet, at times, destruction can simply serve as another avenue for creation, and the most profound betrayal can yield the most exquisite revenge. Allow me to share how a rival's cruelty in the gallery transformed my downfall into recognition. The morning that marked the turning point unfolded like any typical Tuesday in my small studio apartment. The scent of paint mingled with the aroma of coffee, canvases piled against every wall imaginable, and my most recent artwork displayed on the easel like a plea I wasn't certain anyone would heed. Abstract expressionism wasn't exactly trending in our small arts district, but it was the only language my hands knew how to speak. "Maya, you're being ridiculous." My sister Emma's voice echoed from the speakerphone as I applied another layer of cerulean blue to what would become my masterpiece. "You can't live off ramen forever. Normal people don't spend their entire savings on paint and canvas." But normal people didn't understand that art wasn't a choice for me. It was breathing. You don't decide to breathe, you just do it and hope the world gives you enough space for the next inhale. The Riverside Gallery exhibition was supposed to be my breakthrough. 6 months of preparation, countless sleepless nights, and every favor I could call in from art school connections had led to this moment. Emerging Artists Showcase, they called it. 10 painters, 2 sculptors, 1 chance to prove that abstract expressionism wasn't dead, just waiting for the right voice to resurrect it. I'd been working on the centerpiece for 18 months, a canvas that measured 4 feet by 6 feet, layers upon layers of color that seemed to shift depending on the light, the angle, the mood of the viewer. I called it metamorphosis because that's what it represented. The slow, painful, beautiful process of becoming who you're meant to be. Every brushstroke was a day I'd chosen art over stability, passion over practicality, dreams over the safety net everyone else seemed to take for granted. Serena Blackwood had been circling my work like a vulture since art school. We'd started as classmates, both drawn to abstract work, both desperate to make names for ourselves in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to anything that couldn't be easily categorized or quickly consumed. But where I painted from instinct, from some deep well of emotion I couldn't name, Serena painted from calculation. Her work was technically proficient, commercially viable, and utterly soulless. She'd already had 3 gallery showings while I was still mixing paint in my kitchen. Her pieces sold consistently to collectors who bought art like they bought furniture, focused more on how it matched their decor than how it made them feel. Serena had mastered the art of giving people what they expected, while I was still stubbornly insisting on giving them what they didn't know they needed. The Riverside Gallery exhibition felt like Christmas morning and a funeral all at once. Artists arrived with their hearts in their hands, displaying the most vulnerable parts of themselves for strangers to judge. I watched sculptors arrange their pieces with the careful precision of surgeons, painters adjusting lighting with the intensity of directors staging their final scene. My hands shook as I hung Metamorphosis on the designated wall space. Under the gallery's soft spotlights, the painting seemed to come alive. The deep purples and burning oranges I layered created depths that drew viewers in, made them want to step closer, to lose themselves in the swirling patterns that had cost me months of sleep and most of my sanity.
"Looking good, Maya." Jonathan Rivera, one of the other exhibiting artists, paused beside my piece with genuine appreciation. "There's real depth here, real emotion. This is going to turn heads tomorrow night." His words felt like benediction. Jonathan had been painting professionally for 15 years, had connections I could only dream of. If he saw something in my work, maybe the critics would too. That's when Serena appeared, moving through the gallery like she owned it. Her own pieces were displayed in the premier corner spot, abstract compositions that looked impressive from a distance, but revealed their emptiness upon closer inspection. They were the artistic equivalent of a beautiful house with no foundation, all surface appeal with nothing underneath to sustain interest. Well, well. She stopped in front of Metamorphosis, her voice carrying that particular tone of condescension I'd learned to recognize in art school. Maya's still playing with finger paints, I see. She tilted her head, making a show of studying my work with the exaggerated intensity of someone performing disapproval for an audience. A small crowd had gathered. Other artists pretended to focus on their own installations while obviously listening to every word. Gallery openings were notorious for drama, and everyone could sense something building in the air between Serena and me. "It's abstract expressionism," I said, quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about emotional resonance, not literal representation." The words felt defensive the moment they left my mouth, and I hated that she'd reduced me to explaining my art like I was apologizing for its existence. Serena stepped closer to the canvas, close enough that I instinctively moved to shield it with my body. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Emotional resonance? Maya, this looks like something a toddler would make during a tantrum. There's no skill here, no technique, no understanding of composition or color theory. It's just random splotches of paint thrown at a canvas, hoping something will stick." The words hit like physical blows. 3 years of art school, countless hours studying the masters, analyzing the way Pollock used chaos to create order, the way Rothko made color into poetry. All of that reduced to toddler tantrum in front of my peers, my potential buyers, my one chance to prove that I belonged in this world. "She's right, you know." Someone from the gathered crowd murmured agreement. I couldn't see who, but the voice carried the authority of experience. "Abstract work needs more discipline than this. This is just messy." I felt my face burning with shame and rage in equal measure. These people didn't understand what they were looking at. They saw chaos where I'd created carefully controlled complexity, saw messiness where I'd spent months perfecting the balance between spontaneity and intention. But their misunderstanding hurt less than the fact that Serena was using my vulnerability as entertainment. The gallery owner, Mrs. Chen, was across the room dealing with a sculpture that refused to stay upright. The other artists had gradually drifted away, sensing that the tension between Serena and me was about to escalate beyond their comfort zone. We were effectively alone with my painting stretched between us like a battleground. "You know what your problem is, Maya?" Serena continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. "You think passion is enough. You think because you feel something deeply while you're painting, that automatically makes the result meaningful. But art isn't about the artist's feelings. It's about skill, technique, the ability to translate ideas into something that resonates with viewers. This," she gestured dismissively at Metamorphosis, "this is just therapy, and expensive therapy at that." I should have walked away, should have taken the high road, preserved my dignity, saved my painting. Instead, I heard myself responding with a voice I barely recognized as my own. "At least my work comes from something real. Your paintings are technically proficient and completely forgettable. Museum-quality wallpaper that tells viewers nothing about the human experience except how to match their color scheme." The silence that followed felt electric. I'd crossed a line, publicly challenged not just Serena's critique, but her entire artistic philosophy. In the competitive world of gallery representation, that kind of direct confrontation was tantamount to declaring war. Serena's smile widened, but her eyes went cold. "You want to talk about the human experience. Let me show you something about the human experience." Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, she grabbed the corner of my canvas and pulled. The sound of tearing fabric seemed to echo through the entire gallery. 18 months of work, countless layers of carefully applied paint, the visual representation of every doubt I'd overcome and every dream I'd refused to abandon, reduced to ribbons in less than 10 seconds. She didn't stop with one tear. As I stood frozen in shock, Serena systematically shredded my painting into strips, each rip accompanied by commentary delivered with surgical precision.
This part here, pure amateur hour. This section, no understanding of color relationships. This corner, the kind of mistake first-year students make. I found my voice too late. Stop! The word came out as barely a whisper, then louder, more desperate. Stop it! Stop! But the damage was already done. Metamorphosis lay in pieces on the gallery floor, my soul scattered like confetti at a funeral. Other artists had rushed over at the sound of my screaming, but they stood in helpless silence, staring at the destruction. No one knew how to respond to such blatant sabotage, such calculated cruelty. Gallery openings had their share of competitive tension, but this level of direct attack was unprecedented. Mrs. Chen appeared beside me, her face pale with shock and anger. What happened here? Who was responsible for this? Her eyes moved from the shredded canvas to Serena, who stood among the ruins of my work looking satisfied rather than remorseful. "It was an accident," Serena said smoothly, not bothering to make her lie convincing. "The canvas was poorly mounted. I barely touched it and it just fell apart." Which really tells you something about the quality of the work, doesn't it? That wasn't an accident. Jonathan Rivera stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd witnessed too many injustices to stay silent. "I saw what happened. She deliberately destroyed Maya's painting. This is sabotage, pure and simple." But Serena had already turned away, dismissing both the accusation and the destruction with a shrug. Sometimes the art world has a way of separating the real talent from the pretenders. Perhaps this was just the universe providing some honest feedback. I knelt among the pieces of my painting, my hands shaking as I tried to gather fragments that might be salvaged. Some strips were too damaged, the paint cracked and separated from the canvas. Others retained sections of color that still held traces of their original power. I picked up a piece about the size of my palm, a fragment that contained layers of deep blue and gold that had taken me weeks to perfect. "Maya, I'm so sorry." Mrs. Chen's voice carried genuine distress. "We'll file a report, pursue compensation for your work. This behavior is completely unacceptable." But I barely heard her. The professional consequences seemed secondary to the personal devastation. 18 months of my life, my entire savings account, my belief in my own ability to create something meaningful, all reduced to garbage because one person decided my dreams were worthless. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of concerned voices and practical discussions about insurance and replacement pieces. Someone suggested I could create something new in time for the opening, as if 18 months of work could be replicated in 24 hours. Others offered condolences that felt more like eulogies. By the time the gallery closed, most people had already moved on, their attention focused on their own pieces and the upcoming opening. I walked home through empty streets, clutching the largest salvageable fragment of metamorphosis against my chest like a wounded bird. My studio apartment felt smaller than usual, filled with canvases that now felt like monuments to delusion rather than artistic ambition. I set the fragment on my easel and stared at it, trying to see what Serena had seen, trying to understand if her cruelty had been rooted in truth. The piece was beautiful. Even torn and decontextualized, the section I'd saved contained all the emotional complexity I'd tried to pour into the larger work. The way the gold seemed to emerge from the blue created a sense of hope rising from despair, of light insisting on its existence even in the darkest moments. That was what art was supposed to do, wasn't it? Reveal beauty in unexpected places, find meaning in chaos, prove that human creativity could transform pain into something transcendent. My phone had been buzzing all evening with messages from other artists, friends, family members who'd heard about the incident. I'd ignored them all. Too raw to discuss what had happened, too angry to trust my own words. But sitting in the silence of my apartment,
surrounded by evidence of my dedication to an art form that one person had dismissed as worthless, I finally looked at the notifications. The messages ranged from outraged to supportive, to practical. Jonathan had sent contact information for lawyers who specialize in art-related litigation. Emma had written a lengthy text about how Serena's behavior reflected her own insecurities, rather than any truth about my work. Mrs. Chen had forwarded insurance forms and expressed her determination to pursue legal action. But it was a message from my college professor, Dr. Williams, that made me stop scrolling. Maya, I heard about tonight's incident. I want you to know that what happened to your work doesn't diminish its value or your talent. Sometimes the most powerful art emerges from destruction. Consider this a chapter in your story, not the end of it. I photographed the fragment still sitting on my easel, the torn edges creating an unexpected frame around the concentrated beauty of the remaining piece. On impulse, I opened Instagram and started typing. 18 months of work destroyed in 10 seconds by someone who called it worthless. This fragment is all that remains of a painting I called Metamorphosis. Maybe she was right. Maybe it is just finger painting. But looking at this piece, holding what's left of something I poured my heart into, I see beauty emerging from destruction. I see proof that even when someone tries to erase your voice, traces of your truth remain. Art isn't about perfection. It's about the courage to create something vulnerable and put it into the world, knowing that not everyone will understand or appreciate it. It's about continuing to believe in beauty, even when others can only see chaos. I posted the image at 2:47 a.m., then turned off my phone and tried to sleep. My dreams were filled with torn canvas and Serena's satisfied smile, with gallery walls covered in empty frames, and the sound of my own voice trying to explain why my art mattered to people who'd already decided it didn't. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from sleep 6 hours later. One notification had become 50, then hundreds. The post was being shared, commented on, discussed by people I'd never met in places I'd never been. Overnight, my fragment of destroyed art had become something larger than the original painting ever could have been. The comments started with local art community members who'd heard about the incident, but quickly expanded to include artists from around the world sharing their own stories of creative destruction, both accidental and intentional. Someone from New York wrote about having their sculpture vandalized in a group show. An artist in London shared photos of work damaged in a studio fire. But they also shared images of what they'd created from the remnants, how destruction had led to unexpected discoveries and new directions.
Art from ashes, one comment read. This fragment is more powerful than most complete paintings I've seen in galleries. There's something about the torn edges that adds to the emotional impact rather than diminishing it. The vulnerability, the violence, the survival, it's all part of the story now. Another notification caught my attention. Someone had tagged the post with hashtags I didn't recognize: art destruction, creative resilience, from ruins to revival. I clicked on them and found myself part of an accidental movement, surrounded by artists who'd transformed damage into opportunity, who'd found ways to make brokenness beautiful. My phone rang while I was scrolling through the growing conversation around my post. Unknown number, but something made me answer. Is this Maya Chen? The voice was professional, crisp, unfamiliar. This is Rebecca Martinez from the Contemporary Arts Museum in Portland. I saw your Instagram post about the destroyed painting, and I'd like to discuss acquiring the fragment for our upcoming exhibition on artistic resilience. I almost hung up, convinced this was some kind of prank. Museums didn't call unknown artists based on social media posts. Museums dealt with established galleries, recognized names, works with proven commercial and critical value. They certainly didn't call painters whose work had been dismissed as toddler tantrums less than 12 hours earlier. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I managed to say, sitting down hard on my unmade bed. Rebecca Martinez, curator at Contemporary Arts.
We're planning an exhibition called Beauty from Brokenness, focusing on works that have gained power through damage or destruction. Your fragment, combined with the story behind it, would be perfect for our show. The rawness, the visible wounds, the way the torn edges frame the remaining composition, it's exactly the kind of piece that challenges viewers' assumptions about completeness and perfection. The conversation lasted 30 minutes. Rebecca explained that the museum had been following the hashtags that had emerged around my post, watching how the art community was responding to both the destruction and my decision to share the fragment rather than hide it. She mentioned compensation, insurance, transportation logistics, marketing materials, professional considerations I'd never imagined would apply to a piece of artwork I'd salvaged from a gallery floor. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, staring at the fragment on my easel. In less than 24 hours, it had transformed from evidence of my failure to the centerpiece of a museum exhibition. Serena's act of destruction had inadvertently created something more powerful than my original painting, something that spoke to the resilience required to continue creating in a world that often seemed hostile to artistic expression. The irony wasn't lost on me. By trying to destroy my career, she'd accidentally launched it. By attempting to prove my art was worthless, she'd created a piece that museums wanted to acquire. By shredding my painting in front of witnesses, she'd provided the dramatic backstory that transformed a fragment into a statement about the indestructible nature of creative spirit. My phone buzzed again. Another curator, this time from a gallery in San Francisco. Then an art blogger asking for an interview. Then a collector interested in commissioning new work. The notifications kept coming, each one adding another layer to the surreal transformation of my life from failed artist to accidental symbol of artistic resilience. But the call that mattered most came that afternoon from Mrs. Chen at Riverside Gallery. Maya, I've been fielding calls all morning about your piece, about the incident last night. The story's gotten out, and frankly, it's generated more interest in our exhibition than anything we've ever done. I'd like to offer you something. She paused, and I could hear paper shuffling in the background. I want to give you a solo show. Not just a corner in a group exhibition, but an entire show dedicated to your work. We'll call it Reconstruction, and we'll build it around the fragment and new pieces you create specifically for the exhibition. What do you think?
I thought about 18 months of believing my art wasn't good enough, wasn't commercial enough, wasn't worthy of serious attention. I thought about the countless rejection letters from galleries, the friends who gently suggested I consider more practical career options, the family members who'd stopped asking about my art because they were tired of watching me fail. I'd love that, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. When would you want to schedule it? As soon as possible. There's clearly an audience hungry for this kind of authentic emotional expression. I was wrong about your work before, Maya. We all were. Sometimes it takes destruction to help us see clearly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of productivity I'd never experienced before. The fragment from Metamorphosis had taught me something crucial about the relationship between vulnerability and power, between damage and beauty. I started creating new pieces that incorporated deliberate tears, visible repairs, sections where the canvas showed through the paint like wounds that had healed but left meaningful scars. Each painting told a story about survival, about the way trauma could become integrated into identity without defining it entirely. I used torn canvas as an intentional element, allowing the destruction to become part of the creative process rather than its enemy. The new work was rawer than anything I'd created before, more honest about the cost of pursuing art in a world that often valued safety over authenticity. The response from the art community was overwhelming. Critics who'd never heard my name were writing about the bold honesty of using destruction as a creative tool. Collectors were placing advance orders for pieces I hadn't finished yet.
Other artists began reaching out, sharing their own stories of creative setbacks that had led to unexpected breakthroughs. But the most satisfying response came from the artists who'd witnessed the original destruction. Jonathan Rivera wrote a piece for Artforum about the way institutional competition could either elevate or destroy creative communities, using the incident with Serena as a case study in how cruelty could backfire spectacularly. Other exhibitors from that night began sharing their own experiences with destructive criticism, creating a broader conversation about the difference between honest critique and deliberate sabotage. 3 weeks after the incident, I received an envelope in my mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery with a brief message written in Serena's precise handwriting. "I heard about your museum acquisition and upcoming show. I always said you had potential. Congratulations on finding your voice." The attempt to revise history, to position herself as a supportive colleague rather than the architect of my near-career destruction, was so audacious I had to admire its boldness. But more than admiration, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Serena's cruelty had forced me to discover reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. Her attempt to destroy my art had revealed its true power. Her public humiliation had connected me with a community of artists and supporters I never would have found otherwise. In trying to end my career, she'd inadvertently given it the dramatic origin story that would define my artistic identity for years to come. I drafted 3 different responses to her note. The first was angry, cataloging every cruel thing she'd said and done, demanding acknowledgement and apology. The second was gracious, accepting her revisionist congratulations and attempting to preserve some professional relationship. The third was honest. "Thank you for destroying my painting," I wrote, finally. "Without that moment of violence, I never would have discovered what my art was truly capable of communicating. Without your cruelty, I never would have found my strength. Without your attempt to silence my voice, I never would have learned to make it louder. I hope someday you find whatever it is you were looking for when you tried to tear me down." I never sent any of the letters. Instead, I used the stationery as the base for a small mixed media piece, painting over her words with layers of gold and blue that obscured the text while allowing traces of it to show through. The piece became part of my solo exhibition, a visual representation of how hostile voices could be transformed into something beautiful when approached with intentionality rather than reactivity. The opening night of Reconstruction exceeded every expectation I'd allowed myself to harbor. The gallery was packed with collectors, critics, fellow artists, and curious strangers who'd followed the story from its viral social media origins. Mrs. Chen had positioned the original fragment in the center of the main wall, surrounded by the new pieces I'd created in response to its destruction. Standing in front of a room full of people discussing my art with the kind of serious attention I'd dreamed of receiving, I felt a complex mixture of triumph and melancholy. This success felt earned in a way that smooth progression never could have. The scars visible in every piece weren't just artistic choices. They were evidence of survival, proof that creativity could persist even under direct attack. "Maya, this work is extraordinary." Dr. Williams appeared beside me, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a teacher whose faith in a student had been vindicated. "The way you've integrated destruction into the creative process, it's revolutionary. You've taken something that should have ended your career and turned it into its foundation." I watched visitors move through the gallery, stopping longest at the pieces where the damage was most visible, where the torn canvas created unexpected compositions that traditional techniques never could have achieved. They were drawn to the honesty of visible repair, the beauty that emerged from acknowledging rather than hiding imperfection. The evening's most satisfying moment came when I spotted a familiar figure near the back of the crowd. Serena had come to the opening, dressed in the kind of understated black that was supposed to convey sophistication, but mostly communicated her need to blend into backgrounds rather than command attention. She moved through the exhibition with careful attention, studying each piece with the focused intensity of someone trying to understand how their act of destruction had become someone else's moment of creation. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, I saw something that might have been regret flicker across her face, quickly replaced by the neutral expression she wore like armor. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement that could have meant anything or nothing, then disappeared into the crowd before I could decide how to respond. I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. The room full of people engaging seriously with my art, the red dots appearing next to pieces as they sold, the business cards being pressed into my hand by curators and collectors, all of it provided validation that was more meaningful than any apology could have been. As the evening wound down and visitors began filtering out into the cool night air, I found myself alone with the fragment that had started everything. Under the gallery's careful lighting, it looked exactly like what it was, a survivor. Beautiful, not despite its damage, but because of it. Powerful, not in spite of its incomplete state, but because incompleteness had forced it to concentrate its emotional impact into a smaller, more intense space. The fragment had taught me that destruction could be creative when approached with intention rather than desperation, that visible scars could become artistic statements rather than shameful secrets, that the attempt to silence authentic expression often ended up amplifying it beyond what smooth success ever could have achieved. 3 months later, I received an invocation that felt like the final punctuation mark on the entire experience. The Contemporary Arts Museum was hosting a panel discussion called Art, Destruction, and Renewal, featuring artists whose work had gained power through damage or loss. They wanted me to speak about the relationship between creative resilience and authentic expression, to share what I'd learned about transforming destructive criticism into fuel for artistic growth. The invitation included front row tickets for 2 guests. I looked at the elegant cardstock, thinking about everyone who'd supported me through the transition from destruction to success. Mrs. Chen, who'd given me the solo show that launched my career. Jonathan Rivera, who'd witnessed the original incident and refused to let it be dismissed as an accident. Dr. Williams, whose faith in my work had never wavered, even when my own confidence faltered. But I found myself thinking about Serena, about the role her cruelty had played in my artistic development. Without her destructive act, I never would have discovered the visual power of incorporating damage into deliberate composition. Without her attempt to humiliate me, I never would have found the courage to share my most vulnerable work with strangers on social media. Without her certainty that my art was worthless, I never would have proven to myself and others that worth isn't determined by the people trying to tear you down. I addressed an envelope to her gallery, including both front row tickets, along with a brief note. Thank you for teaching me that the most powerful art emerges from the deepest wounds. Your attempt to destroy my work gave it the dramatic origin story that launched my career. I hope you'll join me for a discussion about how creative destruction can become artistic resurrection. Consider this my formal invitation to witness what grew from the ashes of what you tried to burn down. Whether she attended the panel or not didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd reached a place where I could extend gratitude to the person who'd tried to end my dreams, because in failing to destroy them, she'd forced them to become indestructible. The fragment of Metamorphosis hanging in the Contemporary Arts Museum wasn't just a piece of art anymore. It was proof that creativity could survive any attempt to silence it, that authentic expression would find a way to emerge no matter how many people declared it worthless. The story didn't end with the panel discussion or even with the permanent acquisition of my work by major museums. It continued every time I approached a new canvas, every time I chose to make visible repairs rather than hide damage, every time I remembered that the people who tried to destroy your art are often the ones who most fear its power. Serena had intended to teach me a lesson about my place in the art world's hierarchy. Instead, she'd taught me something far more valuable, that no one else gets to determine the worth of your creative expression, that destruction, when met with resilience and intention, becomes just another tool in the artist's kit, that sometimes the most beautiful art emerges not from smooth success, but from the courage to continue creating after someone has tried to convince you that your voice doesn't matter. The fragment still sits in the museum, torn edges and all, surrounded by wall text that tells the story of its creation through destruction. Visitors stop to read about the night someone tried to silence an artist by shredding her work, and how that act of cruelty accidentally created something more powerful than the original piece ever could have been. They leave understanding something new about the relationship between vulnerability and strength, about the way authentic expression can transform even the most destructive criticism into fuel for continued creation. That transformation, from victim to victor, from silenced to celebrated, from destroyed to indestructible, became the template for everything I created afterward. Every piece carried traces of that first fragment, evidence that I'd learned to find beauty and brokenness and power in the places where others saw only damage. The art world had tried to teach me that success meant avoiding criticism, creating work that appealed to established tastes, playing it safe enough to ensure acceptance. But Serena's destructive act had taught me something revolutionary, that the most meaningful art often emerges from the willingness to create vulnerably, to risk everything on authentic expression, to continue believing in beauty even when others insist on seeing only chaos.
Years later, when young artists asked me for advice about handling criticism and setbacks, I would tell them about the night someone destroyed 18 months of my work in 10 seconds. I'd tell them about the fragment I saved from the ruins, about the museum calls that followed, about the solo exhibition that grew from what should have been career-ending sabotage. But mostly I'd tell them about the moment I realized that no one else's opinion of your art matters as much as your commitment to continuing to create it. That destruction, when met with resilience, becomes just another form of creation. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to your work becomes the best thing that ever happened to your career. The fragment taught me that art isn't about perfection or universal approval or even commercial success. It's about the courage to put something authentic into the world and keep creating even when someone tries to convince you that your voice doesn't matter. It's about understanding that torn edges can be more beautiful than smooth ones, that visible scars can become part of the composition rather than flaws to be hidden. That night at Riverside Gallery, Serena thought she was ending my story. Instead, she was beginning it. She thought she was proving my art was worthless. Instead, she was creating the dramatic catalyst that would prove its worth to the world. She thought she was destroying my dreams. Instead, she was giving them the kind of origin story that would make them indestructible. The irony was perfect, poetic, complete. In trying to tear me down, she'd built me up. In attempting to silence my voice, she'd amplified it beyond anything I could have achieved through conventional success. In destroying my art, she'd accidentally created something more powerful than anything I'd ever painted before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better. It's taking the worst thing someone does to you and transforming it into the foundation for everything beautiful that comes after. It's learning that destruction can be creative, that endings can be beginnings, that the people who try hardest to stop you often end up being the ones who push you furthest toward your destiny.
The fragment of Metamorphosis hangs in the Contemporary Arts Museum as proof that no act of destruction can truly silence authentic creative expression. That torn canvas, with its visible wounds and concentrated beauty, stands as testament to the indestructible nature of the artistic spirit. Visitors see it and understand something fundamental about resilience, about the way trauma can be transformed into triumph when approached with intention and courage. And somewhere in the city, in her pristine gallery surrounded by technically proficient but emotionally vacant work, Serena knows that her moment of cruelty became my moment of breakthrough, that her attempt to diminish my art instead demonstrated its power, that her act of destruction became my act of creation. That knowledge is sweeter than any traditional revenge could have been. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing that authentic expression will always find a way to survive, to thrive, to transform even the most destructive criticism into fuel for continued creation. It's the understanding that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to your art.
The story continues every time someone new discovers the fragment, reads its history, and understands something different about the relationship between destruction and creation. It lives on in every artist who decides to continue creating after someone tries to convince them their work is worthless. It resonates in every act of courage that chooses authenticity over acceptance, vulnerability over safety, creative truth over commercial viability. That's the real power of art, not its ability to avoid destruction, but its capacity to transform destruction into something beautiful, meaningful, indestructible. Serena taught me that lesson without meaning to, gave me that gift without intending to, launched my career while trying to end it. For that, despite everything, I remain grateful, because sometimes the people who try to destroy your dreams are the ones who accidentally make them come true.